The river was beautiful, smooth, clean, with granite banks and drones flying overhead. The city was proud of it. Officials cut ribbons. Journalists filmed news reports. No one talked about what was happening underground, 7 meters below that beautiful water. There, the aquifer was dying. Slowly, methodically, pump by pump. And one man saw it. They tried to silence him. His apartment was broken into. They chased him down a dirt road at night. But the data, it already existed. The banners appeared as soon as he entered the city limits. "The river is reborn. We are reborn," proclaimed the white letters on a stark blue background. The canvas stretched taut over a 4-lane highway. Another followed shortly after. "Clean water, clean future." Ethan Miller drove under them without slowing, a note of skepticism already forming in his mind. Serious river rehabilitation campaigns don't declare victory just 3 years after a dam's launch. They declare it when investments need to be justified. He parked a block away from the waterfront, the walk taking him past metal barricades where workers in orange vests were making final adjustments to some installation. A pair of drones, maybe 3, traced invisible lines in the air above the riverbank. The faint, intermittent sounds of a system check crackled from speakers, a rehearsal for the main event. Ethan stopped at the granite parapet, setting his bag down on the cool stone. The river flowed. That in itself felt odd. Not wrong, just strange. The current was unnervingly uniform for a channel this wide, its surface reflecting the gray morning sky without a single crease. Miller watched the water longer than a tourist would, his eyes tracking the faint ripples near the left bank, comparing the velocity at the center to the flow near the retaining wall, searching for the natural eddies that should have formed around submerged boulders. There were none. Or rather, they had been removed. The riverbed had been cleared, the banks fortified with concrete slabs, and small flags placed on posts every 100 yards. It was beautiful in the way a scale model is beautiful. His gaze drifted further upstream, toward the point where the river curved around an industrial district before heading toward a small town. The water's color shifted slightly there, not drastically, but it was a paler, drier shade. He pulled out his phone and took a few pictures without any specific purpose, just to document the moment. A cameraman with a tripod glanced at him, then turned his attention back to the river, uninterested. Miller picked up his bag and went to find Mr. Pierce. Samuel Pierce met him at the dam's main entrance, and they shook hands with a brief, professional firmness. Pierce wore a company jacket with the hydroelectric facility's logo, a hard hat dangling from his hand like a familiar, slightly superfluous accessory. "Have a good drive in?" he asked. "No traffic." "That's because the celebration doesn't start until this afternoon," Pierce replied. "It's still quiet for now." They passed through a turnstile, then along a series of concrete walkways and down a metal staircase into the turbine hall. The vibration was immediate, a deep, steady hum that traveled up from the soles of his shoes. The turbines were operating at full capacity. The sound less a noise and more a physical pressure that settled over the ears like a heavy blanket. Pierce led him past a bank of control panels. The screens displayed the standard data set: water levels in the upper and lower reservoirs, pressure readings on the turbine blades, discharge rates in cubic feet per second. Ethan scanned the numbers without stopping, like a man rereading a familiar page. "Is the discharge protocol standard?" Ethan asked over the din. "It's optimized," Pierce corrected. "We switched to an adaptive control system last year." "Adaptive to what?" Pierce didn't answer right away. He touched a metal railing with his fingertips, as if checking its temperature. "To seasonal demand. Peak loads for the municipal water supply, industrial intake. It's all integrated into the system." A graph on the central monitor displayed the flow rate for the last 30 days. Miller studied the curve. It was an almost perfect line, with only minimal deviations, far too smooth for a living river. The water outside had also been too smooth. There was a direct link between this screen and the waterfront parapet, and that link was control. "What about the underground aquifer? How are your recharge levels?" "They're normal," Pierce said. "Can you be more specific?" Pierce led him to a side console and opened a separate folder on the monitor, displaying monitoring data from the wells for the past 6 months. The gesture was professional, but had a hint of theatricality to it, as if to say, "See, we have nothing to hide." "I can export the spreadsheets for you, the last 6 months." "6 months isn't enough," Ethan stated. "I need the data for the last 3 years, preferably 5. A beat of silence. "For 3 years, I'll have to submit a separate request. The archives aren't automated." "Fine," Ethan said. "Request it." Pierce's "okay" carried the distinct tone of a man who really meant, "We'll see." He copied the recent data slice onto a flash drive and handed it to Ethan, then steered him further into the hall, already talking about turbine specifications. Ethan pocketed the drive, but his mind lingered on that brief hesitation, the few seconds before the answer about the archives. As they were leaving, he paused at the last control panel. "Does the automated system log pump shutdowns? Any overnight cycles?" Pierce looked at him, his expression unreadable. "It does. Is that data in the tables you gave me?" "Partially." In the small office they had assigned him for the day, Miller opened his laptop and pulled up the spreadsheets. The room was Spartan: a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking a concrete courtyard, with the roof of the turbine hall visible in the distance. The low hum of the machinery was a constant, faint presence. At first glance, the surface-level metrics looked impeccable. The river's water level, discharge rate, and velocity were all within acceptable parameters, even showing a slight surplus. He scrolled through a few sheets before switching to the groundwater data. His first thought was that there had to be a typo. He double-checked the units of measurement, feet of absolute elevation, all correct. He then calculated the difference between the first and last readings in the table. Over 6 months, the water table had dropped by nearly 30 inches. He opened a regional database on the same laptop and compared the number to the average seasonal fluctuations for similar aquifers. The norm for this period was a variance of about 8 inches, plus or minus. Miller took off his glasses, cleaned the lenses, and put them back on. He recalculated. The result didn't change. He reviewed the formula for converting to absolute elevation, ruling out a methodological error. The trend was steady, not a sudden drop or an anomalous spike, but a systematic, almost mechanical decline. The rate of depletion was nearly identical from 1 month to the next. This wasn't a seasonal fluctuation or the effect of a drought. A curve like this was the signature of a systemic drain. He saved a copy of the tables to his personal flash drive. The metal pen in his breast pocket, a gift from his graduate advisor, pressed lightly against his chest. He was used to that pressure. Ana Reyes called that evening. He had just finished his second run-through of the calculations and was sitting with a cold cup of tea, staring at the screen. "Are you in town?" Her voice was low, with a slight rasp. "I am." "I'm a journalist. I've been covering the water issue for a few months now. I was told you were coming in to do an assessment." "Who told you?" There was a brief pause. "A source in the city administration. It doesn't matter. I have information that might be useful to you. Can we meet?" They met in a small cafe a block from the waterfront, well after sunset when the festive commotion had died down. Reyes was tall, wearing a leather jacket, with a flash drive hanging from a chain around her neck, a detail Ethan noticed immediately. She got straight to the point. "A man died in the town downstream 3 days ago. Andrew Collins, a well driller, 43 years old. The ground collapsed under him in his own backyard. The official report called it natural erosion." Miller set his cup down. "Do you have the coordinates?" She gave him the address. He pulled up a map on his phone, an aquifer pressure chart he had compiled in college from old geological surveys, and plotted the location. The correlation was exact. Not approximate. Exact. The zone of minimal groundwater pressure he had seen in the dam's data today intersected with the site of the sinkhole almost perfectly. Had Collins complained about the water? Ethan asked. Yes, his neighbors said he measured the level in his well regularly. It had dropped almost 3 feet in the last 6 months. He filed complaints with the city. They told him it was seasonal. Miller stared at the map. 3 feet in 6 months. The same numbers he had seen in the dam's spreadsheets. Those numbers now had a name, a face, and a stack of unanswered complaints. I'm going to the site tomorrow, he said. The town began just past the industrial quarter. The road narrowed here, the asphalt old and patched. Miller left his car on the shoulder and walked the rest of the way. Collins's yard was cordoned off with yellow tape. The sinkhole wasn't large, maybe 5 feet in diameter, but its edges dropped away sharply, almost vertically. He knelt and examined the edge of the collapse. There were no signs of gradual erosion, no network of fissures spreading from the center that would indicate a slow process. The ground had given way suddenly, all at once, as if the support beneath it had been pulled away. A neighbor, a woman in her 60s wearing a simple house dress, stood by her fence watching him. Andrew measured it every week, she said as he stood up. He had this pipe with markings on it. He said the water was dropping faster and faster. He was worried back in the spring. How long had he been noticing it? Since last fall, maybe earlier. He wrote it all down in his notebooks. He was a meticulous man. His wife now. She trailed off, her voice heavy with unspoken grief. Ethan took a portable sensor from his bag. The adjacent well, the woman explained, belonged to a property that was currently vacant. He asked for permission to take a reading, and she just nodded. The levels were 30% below the seasonal minimum. He repeated the measurement 10 minutes later from a different point. The results were consistent. As he was packing the sensor away, 2 men approached him. They were dressed in work clothes, their builds solid and practical. The stockier one, with a short haircut, spoke first. What are you measuring? The pressure of the water-bearing stratum. Who sent you? The city administration requested an independent assessment. The man exchanged a look with his companion. The city doesn't need any trouble right now, you understand? The plant provides jobs. If you start stirring things up, people will lose their livelihoods, their families. I'm just verifying technical parameters, Miller said, his tone even. We know what you're verifying. They didn't threaten him directly. They just stood there, their presence a silent warning. The fear for their jobs was real, he realized. This wasn't aggression born of malice, but of vulnerability. Ethan closed his bag, gave them a nod, and walked past. He could hear them talking in low voices behind him. That night, back in his apartment, Miller requested the archived reports. The Regional Geological Fund had data going back to the early 90s. It took him 2 hours to locate the right tables, download them, and reformat the data for comparison. The dam had been commissioned 4 years ago. The decline in the aquifer had begun 9 years ago. Ethan triple-checked the timeline alignment. The data didn't lie. He plotted the dynamic curve, a steady downward slope that had started long before the dam was even designed. The angle of decline had steepened in the last 2 years, but the trend was independent of the dam's existence. He got up and walked to the window. The factory smokestacks were visible in the dark, their bases illuminated, rising like dark columns into the night sky. The dam was a convenient explanation, visible, new, and immense. But the problem had been festering in the ground long before the first concrete was ever poured. At 11:30, he parked his car near the outer perimeter of the hydroelectric facility. The area was lit but deserted. He walked along the fence toward a side service entrance he had seen that morning. He wanted to check one thing, whether the nocturnal discharge rates matched the official logs.
"Stop right there."
The voice was low and commanding. A broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket stepped out from the shadow of the guardhouse, his face impassive. "This is a restricted area." "I'm an accredited expert. Miller, Independent Hydrological Assessment." "Your accreditation is valid during business hours. Leave the premises." "I need to take readings from the night pump station. It will take 20 minutes. The man, Miller saw the name Stevens on his jacket's ID badge, took a step forward, blocking his path. "You can't be here." "I understand your instructions, but the night shift data should be available to an expert upon request." "Tomorrow, during business hours, through an official administrative request." Stevens placed a hand on his shoulder, not forcefully but with unmistakable finality, and guided him back behind the metal barricade. Ethan didn't resist. It would be pointless and counterproductive. He stepped past the barrier and stopped. Stevens stood on the other side, watching him without a word. Being denied access to the nocturnal data was, in itself, a piece of information. Miller returned to his apartment and powered on the laptop. He laid his notebook on the desk, next to the flash drive with the dam's data and a printout of the historical aquifer records. He began to build a model. The question was simple in its formulation. What would happen to the city's water supply if the dam were shut down? He worked for nearly an hour, inputting the volumes of the backup wells, current consumption rates, and the capacity of the distribution system. The aquifer was falling. The dam was compensating for the deficit with its surface flow. Without it, the city's system would hit a critical stress point in 4, maybe 5 months. Would be to accelerate the very disaster he was supposed to prevent. The water table had been dropping for 9 years. Collins had measured it with his marked-up pipe and written complaints in his neat handwriting. Someone had started this process long before the dam, and now the dam was covering it up, like a bandage on a wound from which blood was still being drawn. He stared at the screen. The numbers were static. The truth was there, but the truth, spoken incorrectly and at the wrong moment, could leave the city without water faster than any crime. The numbers don't lie. You can misread them, misapply them, select a convenient calculation method, but the numbers themselves don't lie. This was one of the few things Ethan Miller considered an absolute. He sat at the desk in his rented apartment, staring at the model he'd been building for the last 3 hours. The window behind him was beginning to lighten. It was nearly 5 in the morning, judging by the gray tint of the sky over the factory smokestacks. He hadn't slept. On the screen was a summary table. Declared volumes of industrial water intake, seasonal losses to evaporation, data on precipitation infiltration, the dam's operational regime, the aquifer's dynamics. He input parameters, ran the calculation, adjusted the assumptions, and ran it again. The result didn't fundamentally change. The difference between the official figures and the actual rate of the aquifer's decline was between 25 and 30%. This wasn't a methodological error or a flaw in the source data. A discrepancy like that could only come from unaccounted-for withdrawals. He closed the spreadsheet and opened the map. The pressure isolines he had drawn based on data from regional observation wells spread out in concentric rings. The center of the depression was not under the dam. It was shifted to the south, to where the residential district ended and the industrial zone began. In the morning, Miller laid out 3 geological maps on the table, printouts he had requested from his Chicago office before leaving. They were from different years, 1998, 2009, and 2019. He aligned them using the coordinate grid, weighting the corners with coffee mugs. With a marker in his right hand, he circled the area of maximum decline from the most recent survey, a wide, irregularly shaped blotch elongated from north to south. The border of Victor Crawford's industrial complex ran directly through the center of that blotch. He then drew a blue line indicating the direction of the subterranean flow. The area's hydrogeology was straightforward. The aquifer lay in sand and gravel deposits, sloping toward the river, fed by the watershed to the northeast. Normally, the water moved in that direction. But where the pumps reached into the earth, the flow was reversing. Miller traced the blue line with his finger. It stretched from the small town toward the factory, like a thread being pulled by a magnet. Andrew Collins had lived on that line. He put the marker down, folded the maps, and picked up his phone. An official request for the plant's water use documentation was a standard procedure for an assessment of this kind. Refusing it would be a violation of regulations. Crawford would have to see him. The director's office was on the 4th floor of the administrative building, spacious, with high ceilings and a panoramic window overlooking the workshops. Victor Crawford rose to meet Ethan, extending a hand. His grip was firm and dry, his gaze direct and lingering. "Please, have a seat. Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you." Crawford sat down, placing his hand flat on the desk. Outside the window, 3 tall smokestacks trailed plumes of white vapor. The director glanced at them periodically, as if to ensure production hadn't halted during their conversation. "We're a transparent company," he began. "All our licenses and regulations are in order. Our water use is within the permitted limits. If you need documents, we'll provide them." "I need the primary geological documentation," Ethan said. "The wells, their depths, the pumping schedules, not the summary reports, the raw data." "That will take some time. We have an extensive archive." "I understand. The request is official, as part of an independent assessment. The regulatory deadline is 5 business days. Crawford looked at him for a moment, longer than polite conversation required. It wasn't hostile. It was evaluative. The way you look at someone to determine just how far they are willing to go. "We'll get it done," he said. "Anything else?" "Not for now." The archive arrived 2 days later. An electronic folder, over 80 megabytes, with a neat directory structure. Miller reviewed the files methodically, opening them in order. Water use license, check. Annual reports on extraction volumes, check, from 2015 onward. Technical inspection certificates for the wells, check. The geological assessment from when they were drilled, check, but only for the wells added after the modernization. The period before 2014 was missing. There wasn't a single document older than 8 years. The next morning, he went to the dam's technical department, where regional geological findings for the water basin were also stored. A young system administrator with an earbud in one ear took his request without question and started searching. "The 2000s, I've got some of that." He scrolled through a directory. 2010, 11, I see 12, 13... He paused. "And after that?" "After that, nothing. I mean, the folders are here, but they're empty. Or look at this. Moved to archive. Date of transfer." He squinted at the screen. "March 21st, 2 years ago." Ethan wrote the date in his notebook. 2 years ago. He went back to his dynamic curve of the aquifer and found the same period. That was precisely when the slope had steepened. The rate of decline had accelerated by roughly 40%. The deletion of the documents and the acceleration of the water withdrawal had happened at the same time. He had no direct access to the plant's pump logs, so he spent the evening looking for an indirect route. Energy consumption. That was public data from major industrial consumers, who were required to publish quarterly reports as part of an energy efficiency program. He found the archive on the regional operator's website and downloaded the spreadsheets for the last 2 years, breaking them down by month, then by week. The picture that emerged was strange. The plant's average daily consumption on workdays was stable and predictable, but the nocturnal readings, between 1 and 4 in the morning, showed regular spikes. Not every night, about 3 or 4 times a week. The spikes were short, sharp, and their power draw was consistent with the simultaneous activation of several large pump units. He opened the data from the ground pressure sensors, readings from the observation wells he had been collecting through the Regional Monitoring Center, and overlaid it on the energy consumption timeline. He checked the correlation twice. Every nocturnal energy spike was followed by a drop in the aquifer's pressure within a 2-kilometer radius of the industrial zone. The delay was between 40 minutes and an hour, consistent with the propagation speed of a cone of depression in loose sediment. The night pumps weren't running in the reports. They were running underground. At 11:30, Miller drove out to the southern bypass, taking his sensor, laptop, and a thermos of coffee. He had no intention of entering the plant's territory, just the southern perimeter, along a series of technical buildings visible on satellite images. A few low-slung, unmarked structures with a separate entrance and a dirt access road. He parked his car by an old windbreak, 100 yards from the fence. He got out and switched on the sensor. After a minute of warming up, it showed a stable reading. He took the first measurement and logged the coordinates. He walked 20 yards and repeated it. The pressure at this point was 18% below the background level. He took 3 more readings, moving along the perimeter. The closer he got to the technical buildings, the lower the values. The maximum drop was recorded directly opposite one of the nameless structures, from which several large cable ducts emerged. A pumping station. It had to be. He opened his laptop, plotted the points on the map, and began to outline the cone of depression. The work required focus, and he didn't immediately see the headlights. A car appeared from the direction of the plant's main entrance, driving slowly along the dirt road as if on a patrol route. Then it stopped. Miller put his laptop into his bag without rushing, got into his car, and started the engine. The other vehicle's high beams flared to life, swinging directly toward him. He eased out the clutch and started moving, steadily at first, then faster. The dirt road ran parallel to the main highway, separated by the windbreak. He knew this section from the map. In a mile, there was an old concrete turnoff to some abandoned warehouses, and beyond that, asphalt and residential neighborhoods. The headlights behind him kept pace, even seemed to be gaining. He took a corner faster than he should have, the rear wheels sliding on the loose gravel. He corrected the steering and immediately turned onto the concrete access road. The slabs were old and uneven, rattling the car, but he didn't slow down until he hit the pavement. No one followed him onto the turnoff. He drove for several more minutes before he allowed himself to lift his foot from the accelerator. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. He unclenched his fingers, then gripped it again. He had never been followed before. This was a new variable. Owen Nichols called at 9 the next morning, politely suggesting they chat in a more informal setting. They met at a cafe near the waterfront. Nichols arrived in a suit, no tie, with a coffee already waiting for him at the table. He leaned forward slightly when he spoke, a gesture of confidentiality. "Ethan, we appreciate your work. An independent assessment is a serious matter, and we understand its importance." "Thank you." "But," Nichols paused, choosing his tone carefully. "The city is in a difficult position right now. The plant represents 12,000 jobs, direct and indirect. That's half the employed population. If a public debate begins with ambiguous conclusions, our investors could get nervous. Contracts are fragile things." "I'm conducting a technical assessment," Miller said. "My conclusions will be based on data." "Of course," Nichols nodded. "I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm only asking you to remember the context, the scale of the consequences. Your data may be perfectly correct from a technical standpoint, but its interpretation always requires caution." He added, "It's vital that we maintain a balance. The city can't withstand any sudden movements." Ethan set his mug down. "I understand." Pierce caught up with him near the exit of the hydroelectric facility that same evening. He didn't stop him, just fell into step beside him for a few yards as they both walked toward the parking lot. "How's it progressing?" he asked, without looking at him. "I'm working on it." Pierce was silent for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze on the ground. "You're studying the dam. That's understandable." He paused. "But I'd be looking in a different direction." Miller didn't answer. "You're digging in the wrong place," Pierce said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "The dam redistributes what's left. It isn't what's killing the aquifer." They reached the parking lot, and Pierce stopped by his car, pulling out his keys. "It's all more complicated than it looks," he added. And it was the last thing he said before driving away, leaving Ethan standing by his own car in the fading light. The correlation Ethan found that night was mathematically precise, almost unpleasantly so. Every 3 to 4 days, between 1 and 4 in the morning, the factory's energy consumption would spike. 40 to 60 minutes later, the pressure in the aquifer would plummet in the southern sector. The cycle repeated with the steady, unnerving rhythm of a metronome. He compiled all the data onto a single map, measurement points, depression contours, and timestamps. The resulting picture left no room for alternative explanations. Deep water pumps were running at night, on a schedule that was not reflected in any official document. An envelope containing a flash drive appeared the next morning. It was in the mailbox of his apartment, with no signature or return address. The drive held a single PDF file, a scanned document bearing the factory's letterhead. It was dated 6 years ago and marked "for internal use only." He read it twice. It was a geological assessment prepared by a contracting firm, summarizing the results of groundwater monitoring on the complex's territory. The conclusion was 2 paragraphs long. The aquifer in the zone of intensive pumping was approaching a critical level. If the current extraction volumes were maintained, irreversible damage to the water-bearing stratum was possible within 3 to 4 years. The report recommended an immediate 30% reduction in daily water withdrawal and a technical redesign of the well system. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten resolution in a large, sweeping script. Acknowledged. Under current conditions, fulfilling contractual obligations is the priority. Revisit the issue upon completion of the investment cycle. The signature was clear. V. A. Crawford. Crawford had read that document 6 years ago. The water table had continued to drop. 3 years ago, the files containing the geologists' warnings had vanished from the archives. Andrew Collins had measured the well and written his neatly penned complaints. Then the ground had fallen out from under his feet. Ethan stared at the signature beneath the resolution, then at the map with its red dots and blue lines. This wasn't environmental negligence. It wasn't a managerial error. Someone had made a decision. They had signed their name to it. And they had kept on pumping. On Monday morning, with a clear head, Miller laid out his materials. He used his small desk, the windowsill, and the edge of the bed. The geological maps were on the left, arranged chronologically. The graphs of energy consumption and aquifer pressure were in the center, overlaid on a shared timeline. The printout of the internal report with Crawford's resolution was set apart in a clear plastic sleeve. On top of it all lay the analytical brief he had spent 3 days writing. The chain of events was unbroken. Each link was supported by documentation, every correlation double-checked. He reviewed the formulas in his calculation app. The margin of error in locating the center of the depression cone was plus or minus 150 yards. Even with that tolerance, the epicenter remained squarely within the boundaries of the industrial complex. He took a photo of the layout with his phone, then a close-up. He reprinted his analysis with the latest revisions and gathered everything into a single folder. The dossier was complete. The lawyer Miller found through a colleague worked out of San Antonio, and they connected over a video call. A man in his mid-40s with glasses and neatly trimmed temples appeared on the screen. A professional, accustomed to paperwork, not courtrooms. "Show me the structure of your evidence," he said without preamble. Miller walked him through the materials, the primary monitoring data, the indirect indicators from energy consumption, and the factory's internal document. "The geologist's correspondence. How did you obtain it?" "Anonymously." "That's a problem. An anonymous source is not admissible evidence in a criminal proceeding. The defense will immediately question its origin." "I'm not building a criminal case. I'm demanding an investigation." "The difference is smaller than you think," the lawyer said, turning a page in his notes. "Publishing this could be classified as disseminating trade secrets, especially the document with the resolution. It's marked for internal use. That document proves the company's management was aware of the risks and consciously ignored them." "I understand what it proves," the lawyer said, taking off his glasses to clean them. "I'm explaining your liability. Crawford could sue you for distributing corporate documents, plus a defamation suit if the article contains direct accusations against him as an individual." After a moment of silence, Ethan asked, "What do I need to do to minimize that risk?" "Clearly separate facts from conclusions in any public statement. Your analytical brief is good. It says, 'The data indicates a possible connection.' That's the right phrasing. But if a journalist writes, 'Director Crawford is guilty of manslaughter,' that's their liability, not yours. Make sure your name is only attached to what you can defend in court." "I can defend every number." "The numbers, yes. The causal link between those numbers and a specific person's death, that's an interpretation. A court will challenge it." After the call, he went through his report with a red pen, replacing words like "therefore" and "proves" with "corresponds with" and "indicates a correlation." The language became drier, but it was now legally sound. He and Anna agreed to meet on Wednesday at her newspaper's office. It was a small, older building downtown, a 10-minute walk from the waterfront. She was waiting in a windowless conference room with a long table and a whiteboard. She didn't offer coffee, which he took as a good sign. This was about business. "Did you bring everything?" "Yes." Miller opened his folder and explained the structure of the evidence. Anna listened, her head held straight, occasionally tilting it to the side, a gesture he had come to recognize as a sign of a question or doubt. "The nocturnal energy spikes. Can you confirm those publicly, with a link to open-source data?" "It's from the Regional Energy Efficiency Program, a public registry. I'll give you the link." "Good," she said, making a note. "The internal document. Is it from the anonymous source?" "Yes, we can refer to it indirectly. According to information obtained by this newspaper, a direct publication is risky without a second source for verification." "Understood." "The timeline, the maps, the energy consumption, your field measurements, we can publish all of that with direct citations. It makes the piece evidentiary, not just accusatory," she said, setting down her pencil. "Give us a week for verification, 10 days max." He put the folder back in his bag, a flash drive with an encrypted copy in his jacket pocket. Leaving the newspaper office, he paused on the steps and looked toward the waterfront at the end of the street. The calm water, the flags on their posts. Something that felt like relief stirred in his chest. He got home around 8 on Friday evening, set his bag by the door, and reached for the light switch. He stopped. The lock on his door hadn't been forced. He only noticed when he pulled his key out and saw fresh scratches around the keyhole. The kind left by a pick or a professional tool, one that works quickly and quietly. He entered without turning on the light, listening. The apartment was silent. He flipped the switch. At first glance, everything was in its place. The mug on the desk, the notebook, a stack of printouts. But his laptop, he had closed it before he left, was open. He sat down at the desk and pressed the power button. The system took longer than usual to boot, then displayed a file system error. He opened the File Explorer and found his work folder. Some of the documents were there, others were gone. He checked the recent activity log. 3 files had been deleted today at 5:47 p.m. His final analytical brief, the spreadsheet with the pump cycle timestamps, and the exported map with his measurement points plotted on it. 5:47 p.m. At that time, he had been on a streetcar crossing the city center. This wasn't a random series of events. It was a system, people, resources, access to information about his movements, and where he kept his data. The question was, who had arranged it? He went to the window. The factory lights glowed orange against the night sky. An unpleasant realization settled in. They had been watching him since his night trip to the perimeter, at least. Probably longer. He returned to the desk. The flash drive with his backup copy was on a chain in the inside pocket of his jacket. He had a habit of wearing it every time he left the house, a practice born from once losing a month's worth of calculations to a fried hard drive. He plugged it into the laptop, opened the encrypted archive, and typed in the long password he had committed to memory. The archive opened. The analytical brief was there. The pump cycle table was there. The map with the measurement points was there. The internal factory document with Crawford's resolution was there. He checked every file, not with a cursory glance, but by cross-referencing key values, dates, coordinates, and numerical data. Everything matched what he remembered. He then checked his cloud storage where he had uploaded copies 3 days ago. The folder was intact. They had gained almost nothing. They had deleted the working versions, but his backups remained untouched. Perhaps they hadn't found them, or perhaps they hadn't known they existed. He copied everything to a second drive from his bag, changed his cloud storage passwords, and then considered the laptop. If they had installed spyware, it changed everything. Tomorrow, he would have to work from a different device. Anna called late on Wednesday evening. Her voice was different. Not quick and businesslike, but cautious. "Ethan, we have a problem." He sat down on the edge of the bed. "They've halted the publication." "For how long?" "It's unclear. The editor-in-chief is citing technicalities, says it needs additional legal review." A pause. "But he got a call before that. He didn't say who, but he mentioned the position of our main advertisers." "The industrial complex is our largest advertising partner," she added quietly. "A corporate subscription, an annual placement. It's about 20% of the paper's budget." "I see." "I'm trying to convince him. The material is verified, the sources are solid, but he wants us to soften the language." "Soften it how?" "Remove the specific names. Write about it in general terms. A number of industrial enterprises in the region, without mentioning Crawford." "Without specifics, it's not an investigation. It's an article about regional water supply issues." "I know," she said, her voice tense. "I'm telling you what's happening, not what I'm proposing." "What do you need to get the full story published?" "A second independent source confirming the document with the resolution. That would give the editor leverage against the pressure. Or a national outlet to pick up the story in parallel. Then it would be impossible to stop." He spent the next 2 days trying to find a second source. He wrote to the former geologists from the firm that had authored the warning report 6 years ago. One never replied. The other responded curtly, "I no longer work on that topic," and went silent. On Tuesday evening, Anna sent him a text. "Editor says if we don't have a second source by Friday, the story is shelved indefinitely." Ethan put his phone down and stared at his notebook. Outside, rain began to fall. He looked up at the factory smokestacks, fuming calmly and evenly in the dark, as if nothing were wrong. Miller held no illusions that a publication alone would change anything. Even if the story ran, it wouldn't stop the pumping tomorrow. It wouldn't bring water back to Collins's well. It wouldn't undo the signature on a 6-year-old memo. But a publication would trigger a process, one that the system would find much harder to silence. Without it, everything would remain in his folder, on his flash drive, on a laptop that had already been compromised once. He opened a new document, not on the laptop, but on his phone, which was less likely to have been tampered with. He began to write. Not for the newspaper, but for himself, a plan of action, assuming Anna couldn't get the story published. Federal oversight agencies for water resources, the Environmental Protection Agency, the State Bureau of Investigation, if there were grounds for a criminal complaint, and there were. The regional prosecutor would be a last resort, too entangled in the same local system of dependencies. At the end of the list, he wrote the name of a journalist at a national publication, someone he'd crossed paths with at a conference 2 years prior, who specialized in industrial ecology. Miller put the phone away. The page with his plan remained open on the screen. Outside, the rain was getting heavier. The factory smokestacks continued their silent, steady work. The dossier was on the backup flash drive in the inside pocket of his jacket, where he had kept it every day since coming home on Friday to find his laptop open. Miller understood one thing with a clarity he had previously avoided. Hoping the system would correct itself through a newspaper article was the most convenient of all possible illusions. It was convenient because it allowed him to pass the responsibility on to someone else. The journalist, the editor, the readers, anyone. But the editor wasn't publishing. There were no readers, and the responsibility hadn't gone anywhere. He closed his laptop and looked at the page of options. He had choices. It was just that none of them were convenient. The first post appeared on Wednesday morning. Miller saw it by chance when someone from a local online community sent him a screenshot from a city news group. The post was anonymous, citing no sources or names, just some out-of-town expert trying to destroy the city's economy for personal PR. It had 40 comments, most of them indignant. He closed his phone and went back to his spreadsheets. By evening, there were several more screenshots. One group used his name. Another posted a photo of him, taken from about 100 feet away. In the picture, he was standing at the waterfront parapet, looking at the water. The caption read, "The provocateur surveys his handiwork." Miller stared at the photo for a long time. He didn't remember the moment, or who could have been filming him. It might have been from his very first day in the city. The factory released an official statement the next day. The press office was professional, a neutral tone, carefully worded. The company operates in strict compliance with all current regulations. In response to the spread of false information damaging to our business reputation, our legal department is preparing an appropriate appeal to the courts. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who they were talking about. A few townspeople sent Miller messages, strangers who had found his contact information through a professional registry. Most were brief. Leave. One was more detailed. My brother has worked at the plant for 18 years. If it closes, we'll lose our apartment. Did you think about that? Ethan put the phone away. The man's brother worked in a plant powered by wells that were draining the land from under a whole community. He was not to blame. That too was the truth. Nichols called on Friday. He didn't text, he called, which in itself suggested a difficult conversation. Ethan, we need to meet. Today, if possible. Where? At the city administration building, officially. There, Nichols received him in a conference room with a large table and a portrait on the wall. Another man sat with him, in his 50s, wearing a dark blazer with no tie. Nichols introduced him only as a legal advisor, without specifying whose. Please sit, Nichols said, gesturing to a chair. This is a serious conversation, so let's not waste time. The situation is deteriorating, Nichols began. The public outcry is having a negative impact on the investment climate. 2 partners have already suspended contract negotiations for next year. He placed his hand flat on the table, a gesture Ethan now recognized from his meeting with Crawford. This is costing the city a great deal. I conducted an expert assessment, Ethan stated. The data has not been published. The data is circulating. We're not interested in the source of the leaks. We're interested in the result. A pause. There is another matter. Your expert accreditation was granted at the request of the city administration. The administration has the right to initiate a review to determine whether the conclusions of your assessment are consistent with the stated subject of the investigation. Ethan looked at Nichols. You mean revoking my accreditation? It's called a standard quality control procedure, the legal advisor corrected him, his voice as flat as if he were reading from a document. I see, Ethan said, taking a sip of water. What exactly are you proposing? Nichols leaned forward slightly. The assessment's conclusion can be reformulated. An emphasis on the systemic water supply problems in the region without tying them to specific facilities. This would allow us to initiate a planned modernization through a federal program. Slower, yes, but without destructive consequences for the city. That's a different assessment, not the one I conducted. It's the same work, just with different conclusions. Miller set his glass down. No. Nichols's expression didn't change. He slid a piece of paper across the table. This is a notification of the initiation of a review of your expert activities. You have 10 business days to respond. For now, it's an unofficial document. He paused. For now. Ethan read the notice in his car, in the parking lot. 2 paragraphs of standard bureaucratic phrasing that boiled down to a simple message. Prove you're competent, or lose the right to sign your name to another report. He returned to his apartment and opened a new laptop. Not the one that had been broken into, but a clean one he'd bought 3 days ago. He transferred the data from his backup drive and opened the formal complaint he had drafted on his phone. He reread it, then added 3 new paragraphs detailing the attempt to revoke his accreditation and the official notice from the city. It was all part of the picture now. The list of recipients was clear. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency, the State Bureau of Investigation, both the regional office and the central headquarters, bypassing the local level. He attached the complete archive, the geological maps, the pump cycle tables with timestamps, the public energy consumption data, the results of his field measurements with coordinates and dates, and the analytical brief with the phrasing vetted by the lawyer from San Antonio. The internal report with Crawford's resolution was a separate attachment, noted as being from an anonymous source. The final document was a timeline of his own involvement, being followed from the factory, the break-in at his apartment, and his conversation with Nichols. He read through the entire package one last time, corrected 2 phrases, and closed the document. Then he reopened it and added a single sentence to the end of his analysis. The death of Andrew Collins, a 43-year-old well driller who died as a result of a ground subsidence on April 14th of this year, is, according to the available data, a direct consequence of systematic, unpermitted groundwater extraction. I request that this fact be examined as part of a criminal investigation. He sent everything through a secure email service and again through the EPA's official portal, which assigned each submission a tracking number. He heard nothing for 4 days. Anna texted once. Editor isn't budging. Waiting for your signal. He replied, Wait. On the 5th day, a call came from an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. number. Ethan Miller? Yes? Senior Inspector, EPA Federal District Office. Your submission has been reviewed. We have sent a formal inquiry to the regional office and the state prosecutor. A commission is scheduled to visit the site next week. The industrial complex? The facility and the surrounding area. You will be notified of the results in due course. The call lasted 3 minutes. On Monday morning, He saw it in the newsfeed before anyone called him. A headline on a national wire service read, "EPA launches investigation into industrial facility over allegations of illegal groundwater extraction." The text was brief and dry, but the city's name was in the subheader. Anna called 20 minutes later. "Did you see it?" "I see it." "The editor has approved the story, with a citation of the official investigation." A brief pause. "It's running tonight. We're using your data as the foundation. Are you willing to be named as the source?" "Yes, under my full name." Crawford appeared on the regional news channel that same day, standing at the entrance to his administrative building, his back straight, his gaze calm. "The company operates in full compliance with all licensing requirements. This review is a standard procedure, and we are prepared for it. Unfortunately, it was initiated by an individual interested in destabilizing a cornerstone of our local economy. This is a political provocation that has nothing to do with real environmental concerns." A reporter asked about hidden wells. "There are no undeclared assets on the company's territory," Crawford said. "That is a lie." 3 days later, Anna sent him the commission's preliminary findings, a leaked fragment that had appeared on several independent news blogs. The text was technically precise. The commission had identified 7 wells on the industrial complex's territory that were not reflected in its official water use documentation. The total estimated daily extraction volume exceeded the declared figure by a factor of 2. 3. The aquifer's condition matched the critical state described in the company's own internal report from 6 years ago. The last paragraph concerned the nearby town. The ground subsidences in the residential area correlated in time and location with the aquifer's cone of depression. The commission recommended that the State Bureau of Investigation review the possible connection to the death of Andrew Collins. He put his phone down. He stood up and walked to the window. Collins had written his complaints in a neat hand with dates and figures. They told him it was seasonal. Then the ground fell out from under his feet. Now it was in the official document of a federal commission. The text message arrived late in the evening. It was from an unknown number, without a sender's name. "A criminal case has been opened for illegal extraction of groundwater and causing harm to citizens as a result of violating water use regulations." Miller read it twice, then put his phone away and pulled on his jacket. He stood at the same spot on the waterfront where he had stood on his first day, looking at the unnaturally smooth water and knowing something was wrong. The river flowed evenly, without a ripple. The dam was working. He reread the message. A criminal case. It wouldn't stop the pumping tomorrow. It wouldn't return the water to an aquifer that had been drained for 9 years. It wouldn't change what had happened in Andrew Collins's yard. The investigation would take months, maybe years. But the crime was no longer nameless. It existed in official documents with dates and signatures, with the coordinates of wells and the results of measurements. It could be disputed, but it could no longer be made to disappear. Miller looked out at the river. "The water remembers who took it anyway," he said quietly, to no one but the river air. The current moved steadily. Beneath the granite parapet, under the layers of water and sand and gravel, in the deep silence of an aquifer that could no longer be ignored, a reckoning had begun. He put his phone in his pocket. The flash drive on its chain was in its usual place, a familiar weight against his chest. He stood for another minute, then turned and walked home.